This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi there, welcome back to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with your host, David Charlton. So the clock is ticking on the end of 2024. It's also ticking on this short series of podcast episodes. We're now at part 7 of 8, where I've been unpicking this question: what can I expect when working with a sport psychologist, from information that I picked up from ChatGPT. The statement I'm going to read out now is confidentiality. Your sessions will be confidential, creating a safe space for you to express your thoughts and your feelings. Now, this is a very, very good point that ChatGPT highlights. And if you look at any handbooks, any registration bodies, they're also going to mention this whole piece about confidentiality. And if we're thinking about the development of mental toughness, resilience, confidence, emotional intelligence, it's such a vital component. However, is it true? Are all sessions confidential when you work with a sport psychologist? And this is something that we're going to go on to unpick. Certainly, as a sport psychologist, you have to be mindful, firstly, of who you're working with, who your client is. Are they socially anxious, maybe self-conscious? If that was the case, would working in a cafe, a public space, in a team environment, or in a hotel lobby, would it actually work? If the client was neurodiverse, again, this would have to be factored in because of the stimuli. Again, if you go back to the cafe or the public space, they could be distracted by the amount of people, by music, by the fact that there's lots going on. Then you've got a formal meeting room. Would that appease some clients? Or would they look at it as too formal? In sport, a lot of people, be that athletes or coaches, are quite used to chatting in changing rooms, on the side of pitches, on courts and things like that. So a meeting room might make them feel uncomfortable. Then we could factor in walking, just going for a quiet walk or a hike up a footpath somewhere or up a hill. Maybe that would be quite useful for some clients. I know I've certainly found that's the case with a variety of clients that I've worked with. We've got to factor in as well, when we're thinking about the client, practical sessions. So it's very easy in our job to get involved on a tennis court, a cricket pitch, a football pitch, on a golf course. Yet if I think about the confidentiality aspect to working with a golfer, if we were on a putting green, for argument's sake, which is next to a clubhouse, and maybe there's a few people watching from the clubhouse, how confidential is that? It might well be that there's nobody actually on the putting green or within 100 metres, but the player, the golfer, might feel uncomfortable. And again, that could be the same if you're on a local park with a footballer, a rugby player. You need to be checking these things out, ultimately, with the individual. And we'll move on now to thinking about a sport psychologist who works in an organisation or a club setting, and how you work with your clients there. Who is your client needs to be thought out. Is there transparency between you, the coach or coaching staff, and the player? That would be the ideal, but it's unusual. The player may not want the coach knowing anything about your sessions. So then the whole referral pathway and the process, how things are logged, notes, systems, that needs to be thought out. Ultimately, the player needs to know the process. The player or the athlete needs to be comfortable with the process for them to be able to reach out to you. And again, in this organisational setting, where you conduct the sessions is going to be important. In a cafe, on a walk around a training pitch, all of those factors are really, really important to consider to be able to protect the individual that you're working with. Then we've got parents. So when you're working with young children, the most important thing is the child is comfortable. And it might be that parents do need to be in the sessions, even if it is just for the first 5 minutes or the last 5 minutes of a session. In some cases, though, children do want their parents present all of the time. But then we need to factor in, will kids actually share all of the information, especially if the parent is potentially part of the problem? How will notes be shared? How will communication take place between the sports psychologist and the parents, or the child for that matter. You've really got to be considering who is your client here and come to some agreement with the child, with the parent. So much to consider. And then if we flip that as well and we think about the online side of things, and this could be with children or it could be with other athletes. If we're going to record sessions, this needs to be signed for. All of the information that you store has to be password protected. You don't want it to be leaked, especially if we're thinking about famous clients. This is so important. Their credibility could be affected. You've seen so many libel cases in different fields around this, so we have to factor this in. Which then takes me on to marketing and the use of famous names, for argument's sake. Ideally, again, you should have written consent there. In some cases, sports psychologists feed off those famous names in order to make their name and to gain more and more clients. Yeah, is it ethically correct? That is questionable. You've also got the use of reviews today, video reviews, and then the use of the names. Do you use pseudonyms? All these sort of things have to be thought out and agreed with your client if you're going to maintain a fully ethical practice. And certainly someone who's registered with the HCPC in the UK, with the BPS, BASES, or in Europe, maybe with FEPSAC. These are so important, which maybe the mental performance coach, the mind coach, the person who calls himself a sports psychologist who's just read a book or two wouldn't really think about. What I've mentioned in the podcast episode today is a large chunk of the training process in order to be a fully accredited sports psychologist. And ultimately, when you're working with a client, this is so vitally important. In order to build rapport, for them to be able to disclose all of the information, so often clients are fearful. They don't necessarily want to tell the truth. They want to tell you what it is that they think you want to hear. But that's not going to overcome barriers and blocks. So the more you can factor in the client's experience, understand who your client is, what it is they want, the best environment, the more likely behaviour change is going to take place. And in this case, with demystifying mental toughness being the name of the podcast, the more likely the development of mental toughness is going to take place. So yeah, I hope this has been a thought-provoking episode for you. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I sincerely hope that you have a nice day and a nice week ahead. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.